Welcome to the RDBA monthly webcast. And by the way, happy 4th of July. We're going to talk about something very critical and very important today, especially as we've seen over the past 12 weeks or so. Plant-based versus plant-forward. What's the confusion and what's the clarity? As consumer interest in plant foods is trending higher than ever, retailers are working to help shoppers more easily find the foods that align with their goal to consume more plant foods. But there's a lot of confusion in the food industry and consumers' minds on how plant-based and plant-forward are defined. And those designations can be effectively communicated along path to purchase. With us today, Marda Heuman, RDN, LDN from Wegmans, and Monica Amburn, MSRD, Senior Director of Health and Wellness at Vestcom, for a discussion on the topic. Obviously, with us also is RDBA's Executive Director, Annette Maggi. Now, a couple things before we get started. Number one, we know that during the pandemic, people sought products that boosted their immunity. They flocked to vitamins, minerals, and other healthy ingredients such as mushrooms and elderberry. We also saw, while the meat plants were struggling, we saw a huge increase in plant-based alternatives, including Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. It's been all about health, sustainability, and the treatment of animals as it relates to those kinds of products. If we look at the Nielsen data, what's interesting when we look at fresh meat alternatives, again, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat leading those trends, the 1 week period ending June 20th, it was up still 164%. If we look at the 16-week period since the pandemic started, it's up 218%. For the average unit price, the 1 week is 17.9%. The 16-week is up 22.3%. Now, a surprising announcement just this morning. Coca-Cola has decided to discontinue Odwalla juice. So that's real interesting to me when we look at the whole plant-based situation and what kind of impact when we see a company like Coca-Cola moving out of juices, if you would, and maybe going back to focusing on some of those other beverages of the 500 beverage brands that they have. So Annette, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Phil. Well, Phil, I think before we jump into our topic today, we wanted to share an exciting announcement from the Retail Dietitians Business Alliance. And Phil and I and the whole RDBA team are excited to announce that we are going to do a virtual conference experience in September called RDBA Virtual, What You Need to Know. And this event will take place over September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. And what we really want our members and our retail RD partners to know is that this event is going to really have a conference feel. So it's not just going to be webinar after webinar after webinar. We're going to have a virtual town hall exhibit space. We're going to have the opportunity for one-on-one meetings with vendors. We're going to include breakout sessions and keynote sessions, as well as the opportunity for networking sessions amongst the RD so they can really have that opportunity, connect with colleagues who are doing work that they're doing. So just stay tuned, watch your RDBA newsletter, and more information on registration and details about the event will be forthcoming. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But back to our topic, Phil, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this topic is that plant-based doesn't necessarily mean that consumers are avoiding meat. So Marda, I'm curious to your insight on how you see this playing out in shoppers' purchase behavior and maybe even the questions they're asking at retail.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, consumer behavior pretty much drives what we do as retail dietitians, right? And so plant-based and plant-forward diets are trending right now, and we've definitely seen an uptick in sales. I mean, we're bringing in a lot more products that are meat alternative, plant-based products. We then with COVID, we have all of the uptick of sales of beans and grains, and that's, as dietitians, of course, we want to see people eating more plants. So that's a very positive thing. And I think as retail dietitians, we need to find a way to sustain and support those behaviors. And I think that's where we need to go.
And Monica, what have you seen?
Well, in working with retailers across the country, I've certainly seen very similar trends at retailers. in every corner of the U.S. What I think is interesting is I really think that this pandemic has driven trial of plant-based products due to out of stocks of meat items that people would typically try. And so I think, it's kind of created the necessity to experiment with these products, and that's why we see the continued lift. So I think some of the fear factor has been removed as a byproduct of the pandemic.
Before the next question, I just want to make a comment. You'll probably see me very often typing and going to that screen. And the reason is that I'm going to moderate your questions as well. So we're going to take them as they come through. Please add them to the chat box. And please also tell us who you would like to answer that particular question. Or if it's a question for all of us, just put in all. So let's move to our next question. There's a lot of confusion about plant-based versus plant-forward. Now, Monica, you've been heavily involved in signage, if you would, both in-store, really helping retailers and helping RDs, being able to navigate and communicate properly with consumers. What are you seeing in the industry? What are the various terms that are being used out there? And do you see a light for lack of confusion coming up?
That's a great question. It is a spectrum truly, and what we're seeing in what retailers' perceptions of plant-based are at the moment, and what dietitians' perceptions. It's everything from this should just be a synonym to vegan down to, okay, how do we encourage more fruits and vegetables? So those are very, very different ends of the spectrum. And so what we do with Healthy Aisles at Vestcom, we work with our retail partners and the dietitian teams where those exist at our retailers. And we say, what does it mean to you? What do you think it means to your shoppers? And how do you want to go to market with this claim? So we do have the ability to create customized nutrition claims and lifestyle claims based off of what a retailer wants to go to market with plant-based. But personally, my perspective is that it needs to be a plant-forward item, and that it doesn't necessarily need to be vegan. And no matter what, we need to be educating shoppers, whether you're a retailer or a registered dietitian, we need to be educating shoppers what the difference is there.
So Marda, I'd like to build on what Monica just said. What kind of discussions, I would normally use the word struggle, but what kind of discussions are you having between your buyers, yourself, and your consumers about what plant-based actually means? Or do all three have different definitions?
Yeah, I don't actually work with the buyers, but I can speak to what our team is talking about and what they're talking about with some of our merchandisers and such. And there is definitely confusion. We dietitians can't even decide on what the definition is. And so I can imagine for everyone else, it's super confusing as well. But I think the bottom line is the retailers have to decide for themselves what their definition is, and then they have to communicate that definition so their customers are aware of what they're looking for when they're looking for plant-based foods, merchandising things together, and making people aware of what their definition is. I think the bottom line, like Monica said, is we want people to eat more plants, and that is the goal, and that's what we all should be aiming for.
So in that,
Phil, just to jump in here, one of the things is I've heard, and I think Marda, probably a year ago now, you and I had a conversation about, plant-based is maybe really around that true, Monica, to your point, vegan definition of where it's 100% plants, there's no animal products in it, and that it probably applies to individual foods and to ingredients. But that when you think about plant forward, that can be about eating habits and about celebrating plants more on the center of the plate and things like that. And that it doesn't have to be complete avoidance of meat, but it's more about the dietary pattern. And I don't know, your two thoughts on those kind of definitions.
Well, but Annette, what I was going to ask is, from your standpoint, from the business standpoint, how do we solve this? How do we get rid of the confusion? Does it have to be that RDs take the lead and come up with a definition for plant-based or plant-forward or whatever we want to call this, and really try to up it into the C-suite and say, look, we know that this is a trend. We know it's increasing, but there's a lot of confusion out there. Let's take a stand on what this is. Is that the right approach? Because what we keep on arguing about what all natural is 50 years later. uh, shouldn't we have the RDs really pulling together, and maybe this is a task force group that we assemble at RDBA to try to issue a statement about plant-based, what it really means, and how we can finally help consumers, and also guidelines for the buyers and the merchandisers, because now they have everybody coming in with plant-based everything from chips to alternative meats and so on. And the buyers are not RDs, and they're just going to look at what's on the front of the package. And if the front of the package says plant-based, they're going to go, wow, great, this solves my problem.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, I think that's like the $1 million question, right? And I think the challenge is, Marta, what you talked about a little bit is this is somewhat driven by consumers and what consumers' demands are. I would agree with the idea that we need some kind of core definitions. I think there's a lot of confusion even when you start to talk about products like Impossible Burger and things, because those are foods that are designed to eliminate meat, but to simulate meat, versus I think what a lot of dietitians think about when we think about the plant forward movement is we want people to eat more fruits and vegetables than the lentils and the beans that Marta talked about, right? And so we want it to be really that healthy eating pattern of eating more of those whole foods that we know are really nutrient dense, versus saying we need to suddenly create, do we need, and I'm going to make this up, but is there one more like plant-based milk in the marketplace? Or there was and I can't even remember who it was off the top of my head. I had posted it on LinkedIn a while ago, but someone tried to position a plant-based butter, and I was like, well, plant-based butter is margarine, right? And so I think we need some consistency in the marketplace, but I don't know how we get there, because it feels like the ship has sailed, the bus is on its way already, kind of.
So I'd like to ask a question of all three of you. And this is probably plant forward versus plant-based. When we look at certain trends that have happened, and one of the things that the Mushroom Council worked very closely with the James Baird Foundation is creating the blend, which was both ground beef and mushrooms. It is now extended in certain retailers like Albertsons. They've got a blend of mushrooms and ground beef. They've got a cauliflower and ground beef, and I forgot the third one. What do we think? Is that the right direction that we should be doing, so that we can reduce somewhat the consumption of meat, but include plants? Marta, why don't you go first, and then let's just go down the line with Annette and Monica.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to bridge folks that aren't ready to, like, I'm a meat eater, and there's nothing better for me than a perfectly cooked burger with the juices running down my arms. I will never, I love that. But it's
napkins.
Who needs napkins? I think mixing in mushrooms is a great way for me to teach others to definitely bridge themselves into more and more slowly go into more plants. And I think that's the same with the Impossible Burger and beyond. I don't want to make those seem like they're terrible foods. I don't think we should be eating them every day or maybe even every week. But I think, as a once in a while treat for those people that are trying to eat more plants, I think it's a great alternative. And to answer to comment on your question about this task force, I'm all in with that if you want to do a task force. But I also want to, there might be a lot of people still not aware of the NSF certified plant-based certification.
Yep.
So I would encourage folks to go look at that. There's not a whole ton of products that are getting that certification that have it yet. There's maybe 500-ish. But if you just Google NSF and certified plant-based, you'll get a list of all of the foods that have that certification. So I think that's a step in the right direction, instead of having all these one-off, every retailer making their own definition, that sort of thing. So, but yeah, back to the question, I think those make great bridge foods, and I think it's a great first step for folks to take.
Annette?
Yeah, and I think what we've learned, and Monica and Marta, I think you'd both agree that as dietitians and as health communicators and behavior change experts, we would support the idea that we never do well as a profession if we do all or none thinking, right? If you try and push people so far to one extreme. And so this idea of finding a middle ground of where you don't have to completely eliminate meat, you can still enjoy meat. I'm with Marda. I still like a good burger every now and again. And I have a vegetarian son living at home, so you find the middle ground. But I think we are more successful in getting consumers to change behavior habits in the long term if we find opportunities like that to make incremental changes, for sure.
And Monica, what are you saying?
Well, I think, both Marda and Annette hit it on the head. As retail dietitians, we can't espouse our own personal platforms and how we live our lives, but we need to show the path forward in a plant-forward diet, a plant-based diet, a vegan diet. And we need to show how these specific plant-based foods can be incorporated in all types of diets. They're not mutually exclusive. And just going back to the blends, right? I eat meat, and I'm a new stepmother. And I now weave in the bean blends and the mushroom blends and with the lean ground beef now, and the kids haven't noticed yet. So that's a win. And so I think it's important for people to know all of these strategies to increase fruit and vegetable consumption, and that it doesn't have to be, some stark dietary lifestyle change in order to accomplish those things.
Let me take a question. This comes from Marcia Kyle. With the current pandemic and the emphasis on a strong immune response to COVID, are you seeing more people seeking out the dietitian's advice? Marda, that goes to you.
I have heard that they are. We don't see customers do counseling and that sort of thing at Wegmans, but I have heard that from I know lots of other retailers are offering counseling, and that's a question that we get. We've been concentrating it a lot on our e-blasts and through our messaging and such about immune health. So definitely, I think there are lots of people looking for that information.
And Annette, on our last webcast where we talked about vendor promotions, what came up with both Yvette Waters and Stephanie Schultz was a lot of RDs now doing more video chats than ever before in order to communicate, because they can't be in stores, or if they're in stores, they're not giving RD advice, they're stocking shelves and things like that to help out. So Annette, do you see that as more of a trend and more of RDs doing these video chats, whether it be one-on-one or a webcast similar to what we're doing?
Yeah, and we know Phil definitely, and a shout out to Marcy Kyle for joining us today. She's a former Speaker of the House of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So thanks, Marcy, for being with us. But we definitely know at retail that we're seeing increases in telehealth, as well as just dietitians really focused on how do they be more inventive and creative in how they use social and digital spaces, right? I think the challenge they all have, and across the industry, and to your point about short-term versus long-term, right, is how do you continue to keep that engaging? We've heard retail dietitians who are starting to do cooking classes, like kind of you buy the ingredients, we'll all cook it together, kind of like the Food Network has done. And they're trying to be really inventive about it. So I think it's about keeping that creativity moving so you don't get fatigued from your shoppers, really, with the same things in social and digital.
So Annette, why don't we go to the next question?
Sure. One of the things that I'm curious about is, what have you seen that's working well at retail as it relates to promotion of plant-based foods or plant-forward foods?
Are you talking pre-COVID or during COVID, or both?
Yeah, maybe both. I mean, I think COVID has definitely changed the way dietitians are approaching, or retailers are approaching their business, obviously. So I'd say either or, both. Yeah.
Monica?
Where'd you go, Monica? Yeah.
Again, in what we do with Vestcom and Healthy Aisles, we've seen a variety, but, really having the the plant-based and the conventional items side by side, showing people, what the direct replacement is and what those options are. And again, I think it's really important that, retailers, dietitians encourage, if healthfulness is of concern, turn the package around, look at the nutrition facts panel, of course, because plant-based does not always mean healthier, as in the case of the Impossible Burger versus, a Laura's lean beef, right? So, but seeing that merchandising together and showing people the options seems to really help connect the dots.
So Monica, what would you say about Kroger, where Kroger is experimenting pre-COVID and during COVID with the plant-based food section? Is that long-term the way we go? And I'd like to get all three of you to chime in on that. But Monica, why don't you go first?
I personally understand why they're doing that now, and of course pre-COVID, because that is the hottest term in retail at the moment. So good for them for getting credit for it. They're putting a stake in the ground, saying we're your plant-based destination by doing that. But I think long term they are going to need to consider the inline distribution of plant-based products, so that just like gluten-free, right? Over the years, there were designated gluten-free sections. Now you've got that cross shopper that doesn't want to feel like they have to go to a special dietetic section of the store in order to find what they're looking for. So I think it's a great move for now, but we'll see what happens long term.
So just to build on that before, Annette, I'll let you answer. I remember the days of SD candy and SD products, and they had up to 450 SKUs. And this was a special section designed for diabetics. And bottom line is they're not even on the market, I think, anymore, because to Monica's point, people felt ostracized by having to go to that section, because the message that you give to everybody around you is, I've got a health condition and, stay away from me. So that's an excellent point, Monica. Annette, what do you think about Kroger plant-based?
Yeah, I would agree with everything Monica said. I think one of the challenges in this movement is the idea of inherently plant-based foods. So we all know pretty much the entire produce department is plant-based, right? When you think about fruits, vegetables, nuts, and produce. And so I think that's where sometimes then those sections become around foods that have been altered to remove any sources of meat, whether it's in a main ingredient or sub-ingredient. And then we kind of lose the opportunity to really talk about the total store message around plant forward and plant-based.
So Marda, how is Wegmans dealing with plant-based foods? Is it a special section? Is it a special section in certain categories? Is it intertwined the way Monica described? What are you all doing?
Yeah, we don't have any special sections of plant-based. We have merchandise end caps and such that have plant-based products on them, or plant-forward products. So that's how we're talking about it. But we also have done a very good job for a long time of putting animal protein and vegetables together in our ready-to-cook meals and that sort of thing. Or merchandising burgers together with some vegetables that you can grill up and that sort of thing. So that's how we're tackling it. And yeah, I think it's a good idea for them to put everything together. But again, I agree 100% with Monica, as people like to shop the whole store. And exactly what Annette said is, we need to focus on the produce section and the frozen vegetables and canned vegetables and that sort of thing. And at Wegmans, we talk a lot about half plate healthy, and that's filling half your plate with fruits and vegetables and then putting whatever you on the other side. As a dietitian, I'm hoping the other side is a whole grain and a small protein section. But the point is that you don't have to think about it. It's a very visual representative of, you're going to get all of your plants without even thinking about it. Making sure you get a variety in a rainbow of colors and that sort of thing. You don't have to measure, you don't have to weigh, you don't have to think about it. You're just automatically going to get your right amount of calories and right amount of fruits and vegetables.
So Marta, you mentioned frozen foods, and I happen to be a consumer of frozen foods and frozen vegetables, and I'm getting a little disturbed when all these steamable, microwavable packages came out for frozen vegetables, whether it be broccoli or corn or a combination and so on. I was thrilled. I thought it was great. But what I'm now seeing is that's giving way to the steamed vegetables that now have sauces with it. Yeah, whether it's a cheese sauce, so we've moved from a pure, vegetable product that you could steam that would come out great, that would be healthy, and if I wanted to add some seasoning to it, I could. And now what I'm seeing more and more of are all these sauces and other stuff being added to it. Is that a good direction for us?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent most of my career talking to people about eating naked vegetables, trying to eat them without anything on them. And
Wait, just one question. Are you saying that the vegetables should be naked, or you should be naked when you eat the vegetables?
Hey, whatever. It's the same with the napkins.
Okay.
Personal choice. No, but hey, I think again, if your kids will only eat broccoli when it's dipped in ranch dressing, by all means, feed your kids the broccoli and some ranch dressing. I think it is a way for the people that aren't ready to eat their vegetables naked yet. A sauce might help them find the vegetables more palatable. I know at Wegmans, I'm not aware of us having too many of the vegetables with sauces on them. We have a ton of frozen vegetables and all kinds of mixtures and all kinds of varieties that don't have sauces on them. So I haven't really seen the trend that you're talking about, and other retailers perhaps, or the major brands. We're so private label heavy at Wegmans. So, but again, like I'm saying, I think it's a great way to introduce vegetables to people or get them to eat more vegetables.
So my solution is to have a Wegmans in Santa Monica, California. That's the only way around
Someday.
the whole process. Yeah. I'll call
I take one in Minneapolis, St. Paul first, Marda. Like, I'm halfway across the country you should get to me before you get to Phil, right?
No. The sides of the country are what leads the trend. So, we got to get Dan on this. So
you people who live on the coast believe that, Phil.
Exactly. You're right.
Midwest has its play.
You're right.
Yeah, I'd love to shift the focus a little bit and talk about, one of the things we see in some of the plant-based products that are coming out is that they're not necessarily, I'd say they don't necessarily pass what I'd call the dietitian sniff test from a nutrition standpoint, or they're not necessarily more sustainable. But Monica, what are your thoughts on that, of how do we manage that in communicating to the shopper, and how do retailers kind of try and look at all those parts and pieces together?
It's a big challenge, and I'll even, relay that for Healthy Isles. Initially, it was a real challenge in our first round of our plant-based definitions, because we did apply some nutrient filters because we were very concerned. As a team of dietitians with Healthy Isles, we were very concerned that all of these plant-based alternatives are coming out and leading people down the wrong nutritious path. Now, it's kind of a challenge in that plant-based is a lifestyle decision, much like an organic or vegan or gluten-free diet. But most of the time, people who are choosing plant-based do have another agenda. They have the sustainability agenda or the nutritious agenda, and those halo effects that happen when somebody's got the mindset, okay, this is how I'm shopping now, it can be misleading and a little bit tricky, right? So I think it's just very important that if a retailer comes out with their own positioning on plant-based, that they're very, very clear in how they define it, whether they have a nutrition filter around it, whether they're limiting the sodium because if you don't, technically potato chips qualify. They're potatoes. It was some salt on them, right?
Yeah.
So it can be very, very, very tricky in how you communicate it. But I just say clear definition and communicate to your shoppers as much as possible about it.
I want to go back to what you all have said about produce departments. So we know that the produce department is the most plant-based part of the store. And to Marda, except for the few naked people who go into the produce department, it is naked produce. And it's the best that we can do and closest to nature. But the reality is, from a business standpoint, most items in the produce department don't have the money to promote. There is some, but not a lot of branded products. How do we get around that? How do we promote and get the money to promote and to sample those items in the produce department? Annette, why don't you start on that?
Marda, why don't you start? I'm going to throw that to you.
Throw it to Marda.
And I'll think
It's a toss.
And I'll think about it.
Okay.
Oh, darn. I would say that, back when we were sampling, do that right now, but we just came out with an absolutely fabulous peach salsa as an example. And we have a couple of stores that are, at least one store anyways, that's doing a great job in showing how to eat the peach salsa, not just with a chip, but she's paired it with shrimp and brie cheese and on endive and with a grain. And we don't get to sample it, but she's made these little examples to show people. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great way to do it. Talking about the foods that are in season, the seasonable produce, I think is a great way. Talking about it in your weekly ads or in your store magazines or in signage and that sort of thing is a way to do that. But we do such a good job with sampling. So I'm really excited to get back to that when we're able to do that.
So for the past 10, 15 years, various trade associations have tried to increase consumption with their campaigns, 5 a day, 10 a day. And whether it's here or in the UK, which actually consumes more plant-based products than we do, it's still about 3.5 servings consistently year after year. We can't get it up to 5 servings a day. How are we going to do that?
That's a great question. This is my life's mission. I think just talking about it. Go ahead, Annette.
Well, Marda, I was going to say one of the things, a couple of things that you said and throughout this conversation. I mean, I think one thing about inherent plant-based foods is the idea of pairing them. So people don't very often anymore eat foods in isolation, right? You might grab nuts or something, but it's really talking about those pairings and how do you bridge into, meals and snacks. So Marda, I love the idea that you guys in kind of the meal section that you're promoting fruits and vegetables with those, and you're really encouraging those kind of ready to eat, all those kinds of items to include fruits and vegetables right in them. Like that's a really great way. I think Fresh Cut, Phil, has been a really great opportunity for people to try items that they might not know how to prepare or to clean, so to speak. So I think there's a lot that retailers are doing to promote fruits and vegetables just on a regular basis. You see too, who has the sleeve of the rocket apples? I can't remember what brand that is, but that's a really great way. They're smaller apples, they're perfect for kids, but they're sold in a really attractive sleeve. So some of that kind of merchandising, but also product development to say, how do we create this so it's more usable by that consumer or more approachable by the consumer. I was with some friends this weekend, and the age-old question of how do you tell if a watermelon's ripe? How do you tell if a cantaloupe's ripe? And there's been work done on that to try and create cantaloupes, for example, that change color on the outside when they're ripe, so they're picked at the perfect time in the field. But those kinds of solutions in agriculture will make sure that eating occasion is perfect every single time the consumer buys it, right?
And when you were with your friends, you were social distancing, right?
Phil, you know me. Of course,
yes,
I was.
I do. So I want to ask all three of you another question, and sticking with the produce department. So because of COVID-19, what I've heard from a lot of consumers on our consumer panel is that they're very concerned now going into a produce department and picking individual produce, limes, apples, those things. If I go back, I don't know, 15 years ago, when Tesco started Fresh and Easy here, one of their downfalls was that every single produce item was wrapped. An apple was wrapped in plastic. You might have bags of apples, but there was no fresh produce that a consumer could actually touch with their hands. What do we think is going to happen, or what do we think, forecast, or maybe even know is going to happen with the produce department as it relates to, I love Marda's term, naked produce? Is it going to be naked produce with plastic on top? What do you think? Who wants to get started on that?
Yeah, well, I can say from Wegmans, I don't know this 100%, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to go plastic. We're trying to get rid of as much plastic as humanly possible. So in our sustainability plan. So I don't think we're going to go that way, but I know it is an issue, and there's lots of talk about all of the touching that's going on. And I'm a toucher. I like to feel like an avocado. I like to see how
or smell it or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, I don't know what the answer is. I don't, maybe Monica or Annette they've seen at other retailers, perhaps what they're doing.
I personally haven't, this is, sorry, but I personally haven't seen any wrapping in the Southeast. And I imagine, as well as Marta said, the sustainability efforts is kind of counterintuitive. But, you know, my understanding from recent, health experts, studying the pandemic is that surfaces are really not as much of a concern as, obviously what can be transmitted through the air. And again, while we're wearing masks. So I think education around contact surfaces and the degree of risk in comparison to the aerosols versus the risk of not eating fruits and vegetables, and also just teaching your shoppers how to properly wash and process your fruits and vegetables at home can help alleviate some of those concerns. I know in our household, we're not concerned at all, but we're washing all of our produce when we get home.
But isn't it about the perception more than anything else? When I'm going into stores, and I'm still visiting probably 5 stores, a week, I see people there, squeezing produce, and I see other people looking at them askew and, mentally saying, I'm not going to go near that. Annette?
Yeah, it's interesting, Phil, and I was going to mention, I can't remember which retailer, Monica or Marta, you might remember, but there was a retail dietitian who did a really great video on how to kind of manage the store given the coronavirus pandemic. And she specifically addressed produce and how to just try and select one. But I can't remember. I'm trying to think if it was Harmon's or if it was Giant, but there was a really great video that was kind of circulating for a while on a dietitian who had done a tour of the store kind of with in the pandemic situation and people still trying to grocery shop. So I thought that was a really great example of how to manage that. But Phil, now remind me of your question because I got off on a tangent.
No, whether or not we're going to see produce that's individually wrapped or only in bags, and we're not going to see that naked produce section anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get the point of it of will it make people feel more secure, but I also think the challenge is in the economies of it and the ripeness of the product, and does it change? There are certain foods that are it's going to impact the quality and the shelf life of them if you start kind of doing that. So there's so much in that to unravel. I don't know that we'll see that, honestly.
So we have time for one last question. So for those of you that are watching, please add whatever questions to the chat box. And Annette, why don't you give us the last question?
Well, Phil, I think we've run through most of our questions, but the one thing that I'll ask is, and it's Marta, something you started at the beginning of the call of, we did see, and Phil, you've talked a lot about, and we've talked a lot about Nielsen data and what items have really increased in sales through the pandemic. But the plant-based item, Marta, that you mentioned is lentils and beans and peas, right? So have you seen that consumers are understanding how to use them, are experimenting with them, or do you think it's like they bought them and they're going to end up in the back of the pantry?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I would hope. I mean, there's so many great cooking videos, and there's so many retailers, not to mention chefs and other cooking channels that are doing such a great job of promoting those, what's in the pantry and how to cook them and what to do with them. So I would hope that they're making good use of them. But I haven't talked to consumers about that, so I'm not sure.
And certainly, I think that as we move into this recession a little bit further than now, people are going to go back into their cupboards and they're going to say, okay, I bought all this stuff. I have no idea what to do with it. I better learn what to do with it because I don't want to waste food. Because one of the big concerns that I've heard from a lot of people during COVID-19 is people have bought a lot of stuff, but waste at home has actually increased because they don't know how to do it. So to Marta's point, the cooking videos that are out there and everything else. So, we want to thank Marta, Monica, of course, our executive director, Annette, for being with us today. This webcast will be posted on the RDBA website. It'll continue here on Facebook Live. Please share it with any people that you know. And again, as Annette said at the top, look forward for more information about the RDBA virtual exchange. It's going to be September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. Don't be concerned because it's an hour and a half in the morning, an hour and a half in the afternoon, so you don't have to sit at a computer, for countless hours. There's going to be a lot of networking taking place, a lot of interchange, a lot of great information, and even a lot of fun stuff that we're going to do that we can do in the virtual world. And also we're going to expand this to the entire RDBA membership. So we're looking forward to having 300, 400, 500 RDs join us for it. So thanks for joining us for RDBA's webcast on plant-based and plant-forward. Hope you learned a lot, and be safe, and see you soon.
Thank you.